Good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to join you today to talk about one of our favorite topics, preparing your brand for launching in the United States. We are, as Jose mentioned, with Provisor Marketing and Road to Retail. We have a lot of experience in this area. We're going to move through our slides relatively quickly so we allow time for your questions and we can have some discussion at the end. But rest assured that we're happy to answer any additional questions or clarify any points we discuss today with you later on. Let me give you a little bit of background on us. We are all brand strategy, marketing, and sales experts. We all have big brand experience at places like Procter & Gamble, Quaker, Bayer, Fleet Laboratories. So we really have a broad breadth of experience. What we find when we think about developing brand strategies, go-to-market models, et cetera, for brands interested in entering the US, the approach is very similar, whether you are a small brand, whether you're a new innovative technology, or whether you're an existing brand that just really needs to expand your footprint. The approach applies across categories, and so rest assured that if we don't talk specifically about your category today, this approach applies regardless of what kind of product line you have. There are really two parts to considering a US market strategy. First and foremost, you need to really think about who your consumer is in the US market and why they should care about your brand. What are their needs in that category? What are their needs for the specific product? How do they talk about the usage occasion? And we really consider that kind of foundational work. It's like if you're going to build a house, you aren't going to do it without a basic framework or a foundation for your house, because as we all know, it won't be as strong. What's also important, in addition to the consumer, is really understanding the complexity of the US retail marketplace. And, as you probably know, there's a lot of different retailers. This image shows you retailers are strong in certain parts of the country too. And so understanding the intricacies of the retail market in the US is as important as understanding the consumer and what makes them tick. We do a lot of consumer research, obviously, in our work to develop brand strategies. And I'm going to share with you some data from two different studies that we've done regarding the US consumer and specifically international products. The US marketplace, as you may or may not know, is very complicated with regard to the consumer. There's 332 million people in this country, and we call it a true melting pot because the population continues to be more diverse as the years go on. We did a survey asking 125 US multicultural consumers, where does their family originate from and how do they identify? And what you see on the right-hand side of this slide is a pie chart that captures the answers that these 125 folks mention when they talk about how they identify, despite the fact that we're all US consumers. 51% of these survey respondents actually are first or second generation Americans. And so understanding not only the breadth of the nationalities that they identify with, but also how long they've been in the country is important as you think about who you're talking to and what's important to them. Obviously, you can't reach all 332 million people effectively with the same message or the business model, so doing this groundwork first is pretty important. Let's talk a little bit about international brands in the US, just to kind of set the stage here. We also ran another study that asked 200 consumers the question, how open are you to trying or using consumer brands, healthcare, skin, wellness, etc., from other countries? The perception is that this made in America claim is important. But what we found actually is that 29% of all of our respondents love to try all sorts of international brands. They consider it a treasure hunt. If they see a brand that looks unique and different, they love to try it. And what's particularly important is that Generation X and millennial consumers, so think of those as the folks between age 25 and 54, are more likely to love to try new international brands than some of the other age groups, the older age groups. Now, what's really good news for you in the UK is that 64% of the respondents in this study said they're interested in trying brands from the UK. So already you have somewhat of an advantage because you're kind of seen as new and unique, especially if you have some unique product attributes that are, as I've said, uniquely from the UK. When we asked these consumers in the same study, what is important to you when you think about international brands coming into the United States? Number one was quality. Now, the interesting thing about quality is that that can mean a lot of different things, and it can mean different things to different people. Sometimes, depending on where the product's coming in from, there's concern about manufacturing, there's concern about quality of ingredients. And so we just need to think about what quality means when it comes to your brand and your category. And obviously, certain product attributes that are specific to the country are very interesting to people. They really like this idea of uniqueness, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And so, how you leverage that with your product is important to think about in the context of the US consumer. So some of the things to think about from a consumer standpoint and who you specifically are targeting, there are 4 questions we recommend our clients answer. One is, what is this consumer's job to be done in your product category in the US? The external analgesic category, so the topical pain relief, may have different or more frequent usage occasions in the US versus the UK. And so understanding that is important. What is your product's unique point of difference? Are you just like other brands that are here in the market in the US? Or do you bring something uniquely? Maybe it's a new form factor, liquid versus pill. Maybe it is a unique flavor that is uniquely UK versus US. You need to really think about kind of get in the mind of the consumer, which is why consumer research is so important. Why should the US consumer care about your product? And give them a reason to believe that your product will help them get their job to be done completed. And then really think about how they buy. Where do they expect to purchase your product and your products category? And how do they use those products so that you can incorporate that into your communication and your go-to-market strategy? So those are just some of the things to think about when you're targeting a specific US consumer group for your product launch. I'm now going
Julie?
to turn this, I'm going to,
Oh,
yeah.
I was going to jump right in.
Yeah, I was turn this over to Kate to talk about how you reflect the target consumer in your brand's business model.
And before we leave the slide, we'll just stay, Julie, on target consumer, because I think one of the most important things to talk about is this is your essential homework to do before you start doing any planning, and that is to go find the answers to these questions. So really, really important that you invest resources and time into making sure you really understand this target consumer. And I just want to reemphasize that there's so many neat tools that are out there today to be able to understand the US consumer really quickly. You can go gather data and get insight, but you really need to make sure you've answered these questions. And one of the things that we find so often is that we sort of tend to assume that we know the answers to the questions. You need to check your logic. You need to make sure that the US consumer sees it the way you think they're going to see it, and you need to do the work to check that. It's not terribly expensive, but it's really important that we do. And as Julie mentioned, it's so foundational, this understanding of who is that target consumer, what do we know about them, what are their habits and practices, what's your point of difference, and does the consumer in the US acknowledge that as an important point of difference? All really important things that when you get to Bruce and Tracy and you start talking to retailers, we need to make sure we have the answers to. So really important to do that work. And then Julie, we can move ahead to the next slide. Julie and I are going to talk through how that insight and understanding will affect each and every one of your business model elements. So I'm going to talk through these fairly quickly, but there are a lot of things that we need to understand. But what you want to do is start with that target consumer understanding, and of course, everything that you know about your business, and then be able to craft it in a way that you've got a business model that you're going to be ready to take out to retailers. So the first thing is really your brand position, which is everything from your brand name to your tagline and your story, how you talk about the brand. It's almost always different. country to country, but it has to be really meaningful to your target consumer in the US. Make sure you're speaking their language and that you're able to represent yourself in a way that they'll recognize. The other challenge here with brand positioning is that in today's environment where consumers spend so little time looking at each and every product, you need to make sure that it's impactful. You don't have a lot of time to explain. So from your brand logo to how you talk about the brand to the imagery you use is so important. And it's really important to talk about, Julie mentioned this, why should they care? Making sure you have that emotional hook, particularly in the US market with consumers, we find this is extremely important, that you have some emotional tie and connection to the consumer and that you can articulate that to the consumer. Really, really important. It's another way also that you talk about what makes you different. It will be really important that you're bringing something unique and different to the US consumer. That might be new flavors, that might be a whole new solution. It may be a better cost, not easy to do when you're coming from overseas, but there are all different ways that you can be different in a way that's important to the consumer. And we need to be able to incorporate that into how we talk about our brands and how we present our brands. So this is one of the foundational things that you want to work on really early on, is having understood the target consumer, knowing what capabilities your brand has, what is that brand position, and how can you make sure that you stand out in the market. And the next area, here's an example of how Coca-Cola, what we say and how you present Coca-Cola in the US did not work overseas. So here's a reverse, sending an expat out. But really important to understand that the way that they talk about the brand, you can see that there are a lot of brand elements there that come from the US, so it's recognizable, but they've tailored it for a market that works, because the way they talked about Coca-Cola in the US did not resonate with the consumers externally. So really important to make sure that your language and your position resonates with the US consumer. So here are the key questions to ask. What's your story, and how will that resonate? Testing that will resonate with the US. How does the point of difference match with the US consumer journey? Really understanding and getting in and understanding what their journey is in your specific category is really important, and making sure that you're having a conversation with the consumer where you're really engaging with them and you understand it will be so important. And finally, just one thing to check, of course, which is so important, is to double check that your brand name and your logo is actually trademarked and registered in the US so that it can be used and is protected within the US. Really important step to take. Once the brand positioning is done, we also want to look at really important elements of your brand. Once again, for your product line, how does this meet the needs of the US consumer that you've targeted, that you've identified? Let's say that this is, moms and dads with young children. Very, you really want to zone in on that target. What are the sizes that are appropriate based on their usage occasions? So are there large sizes, smaller sizes? We work on snacks recently and found that most consumers wanted to be taking their snacks on the go. Are you in a package and a form that's going to be appropriate to the usage occasion? Forms are really different. They can be really different in the US than they are externally. We worked on a laundry a product coming into the laundry category a couple of years ago, and externally or in other parts of the world, the pods were really, really popular, but they were not the largest segment of the category here in the US. People are still using liquid. This is shifting. We're starting to see more pod usage now, but back when we were looking at this, which wasn't very long ago, really pods were new. And so we really had to understand that we were talking about a smaller segment of the category, and then we were trying to come in and fit in there when that wasn't the largest segment in the category. It made it really challenging to get position in the US. And then what are the varieties that you'll offer? Flavors, really important. Flavor profiles in the US will vary by region. So what flavors are really appealing in the Northeast will be different than the Southwest. So really understanding what flavors, what ingredients, and once again, those usage occasions to make sure that your varieties are aligning to what consumers need. So here are the key questions. Are the sizes that you have in the forms, do they meet the need of your US consumer? Do you have the right flavor profiles? Ingredient decks, clean ingredient decks are so important now. Where do you stand? And depending on the category and which category you're in, understanding your ingredients, whether it be skincare or food products, is really, really important. And then also which product applications will sell the best. And once again, application can be in personal care, masks versus lotions. There are so many variations by category. Once again, understanding what are the US consumers using now and how do you fit with those usage occasions and how will you potentially be different. Product packaging. This is such an important component in the US. And, especially now coming out of COVID, folks are getting back into the stores. Your package as it sits on a store shelf is incredibly important. It's often your strongest marketing tool is what the consumer sees when they are in shopping. Now, of course, it's also important, and you have to make sure that your digital representation is just as important because e-commerce, of course, has grown so much through COVID and is still very important to consumers. So once again, depending on the category, how they're used to buying, where they're buying, but making sure that your product packaging from the perspective of your brand and how you're presenting yourself to the consumer is unique to the US market is really, really, really important. And you should this includes not only your package design, so we talked about brand name, brand positioning, make sure that your design reflects that. You can see on the right an example of an international design and how it was changed by name and by some of the graphics to fit within the US design. Sometimes these are subtle differences, but super important when you're thinking about the US consumer and communicating to them. We really believe that your product packaging is that really most important marketing tool, and making sure from a design, form, usage occasions, and that all of the visual cues, and of course, in today's environment, sustainability is becoming more and more important. There's much greater awareness when we ask consumers now about what's really important in buying across categories. Sustainability continues to grow and become more important in certain categories, more important with younger demographics, but it's really becoming much more important. So really looking at your product packaging, how as it is now, and how are we going to adjust it for the US market will be extremely important. So questions to ask. Does your packaging reflect your brand's positioning? The Ollie brand, we think, is a great example of a brand that kind of crashed into the market and really established itself with a different package, a different look than what was in vitamins and mineral supplements before. Really great example of coming in and speaking to the consumer and really going away from just saying what the ingredients were to what the end result was, speaking to consumers. So here was a brand that came in and said, all right, this is not about A, B, C, or the different vitamins and minerals. It's about what consumers want to achieve. So the sleep. So speaking to sleep versus really focusing on the example focusing on the ingredient was a really great example of how this brand was able to take product packaging and really align it to a consumer understanding about what they were trying to achieve. And now many brands have followed suit in that category. Does it stand out? We often recommend that you consider what your product will look like on the full shelf so you can see, will you stand out? And that can be package form, package color, package design, but you want to make sure, because there are millions of products in the US. I think it was Walmart has, and I know Tracy and Bruce will know this, like 125,000 SKUs in the store. How do you stand out in that mix? How do you stand out in your section? And really making sure that your package form, package design will do that. Labeling, really important that you make sure that you are aligned to the regulatory requirements based on your category, and that's critical. It's a whole other component of work, but it's really important to do. And also, is it ownable? Is it trademarkable? Going back to your trademarks and your brand name, and make sure it's something that you can own moving forward is really important. Marketing strategy. So this is really important as well. As Julie mentioned, there's 332 million consumers in the US. We can't reach all of them, but once we find out which ones we want to reach, we need to encircle them. There are so many different ways that you can communicate with the consumer. You need to make sure, and this is why we want to really refine our target consumer so that we can understand where it is that they seek out information and how they want to be encircled with information so that you can really make a brand impression and reach that consumer and stand out from the competition. Critically important. And this is always shifting and changing, and it really does depend on your category. The website digital and AI can be so important depending on what platform you're on, which depends on what target consumer you're focused against. You know, outdoor advertising is becoming important again here in the US now that everyone is back out and about. So that's kind of, you know, regaining importance depending once again on your target consumer and what your product category is. And in store, and I know that Tracy and Bruce will talk about this extensively, but really critical how you think about engaging the consumer in store and the tools that are available there, but all different ways that you can engage the consumer. Really important that you have a marketing strategy that is focused on how you best and most efficiently reach that target consumer. And once again, here's where data becomes so important in understanding for your target consumer and your category, where do they look for information? We know in the US in many categories, recommendation from friends and family, and that can actually come from having the right amount of ratings or reviews on consumers online. But it's also ways that people may share information. Is your information, your brand story shareable and something that people can really pass around? It's very, very important. In some categories like food, tasting available at the point of purchase is so important for consumers. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? How do you think about getting your product into the hand of a consumer to create trial? It's not inexpensive, so we want to make sure that we're targeted, but we really want to make sure there are definitely ways that you can do that in the US. But these are all the different things that can be really important in marketing to your consumer, understanding what's important to your consumer, and then designing your marketing strategy to support that will be critically important when you move on to the retailers. So finally, on the marketing strategy, know what your brand's marketing budget is. And this is one of the things that's really important is making sure you're aware of what it's going to cost to generate awareness and trial in the US. One of the most important things we know is that we need to reach the consumer so that they can try our product, and then of course so that they can come back and buy it again. So making sure that we are engaging with the consumer, not only one time to create awareness, but over time to create engagement and make sure that we're driving them back to store. And I know that once again, this is so important. If we have a great marketing strategy, but we're not getting consumers to try and to come back and repurchase, then we won't succeed in the US market, because there's a very short window of success in the US market. We want to make sure that we have a very effective marketing strategy in place right when you get to market. It can't come 6 months later. It can't be something that we'll get into market, we'll get on the shelf, and then, you know what, we will invest in marketing. You have to have a plan that's very specific, and you're ready to hit that go button the minute that you get into market, because you need to start creating trial and repurchase as quickly as possible. And now I'm going to pass it over to Tracy and Bruce.
Thank you so much, Kate and Julie. Just so insightful, and I love the approach, and just can't emphasize this enough that it really has to start, you know, with the consumer. So Bruce and I have been in consumer packaged goods for 30 plus years, have worked on a lot of big brands and small brands. And so today we're going to talk about, in our segment, things to think about when going to retail here in the US. So I'm going to just jump right in so we have enough time for our participants to ask questions. So the first question you need to ask yourself when thinking about coming to US retail is, are you getting traction online? Buyers want to see proof of concept. So what are your sales through Amazon or on your own website? How many reviews, as Julie and Kate mentioned? So they really do want to see, buyers want to see proof of concept for your brand. You may have retail distribution now in other parts of the country, so you'll want to share that as well. And what buyers look for in sales at retail is how many units per store per week are you moving. So if you do have that kind of data, that is really great to share with a buyer when meeting with them. Bruce?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tracy. One of the issues to keep in mind here is it's very exciting to say you're going to go to US retail and, you know, kind of jump in and see how it goes. It is very expensive. to play the game here. And Tracy and I will talk about that in a few moments. But if you can get going on Amazon, if you can get going with your own direct-to-consumer website and show that you're getting some traction, you'll begin to get not only a feel for how the U.S. market operates and which of your items, if you have more than one brand or flavor, et cetera, which ones might become where you want to go forward with first here in the U.S. And as spoken about earlier, can't drive this home enough. Does your product have a true meaningful point of difference? And that's a meaningful point of difference that consumers are playing back, that this brand, this pen, this cup, whatever it might be, is different than what's in the market. As entrepreneurs and small emerging brands, we think that our product is so unique, it's unbelievable. And perhaps yours is, but it'll be much more compelling if you have some data that says, hey man, we talked to 500 people and they say these 5 things. Because the US retailers, when they think about their section of the store, which they call here their set, they really don't care how any brand does. They care how their set does. So if you're going to bring forward a product that helps their set do better, they're going to be interested. Next is the funding. Again, the U.S. is not an inexpensive place to do business, and creating what we'll call a demand plan, some will call it a marketing plan, et cetera. There's really 2 halves of it, okay? There's the consumer plan about how you're going to drive awareness and trial to the consumer. And then there's also what's called here in the US a trade marketing plan. And you will be expected to invest a certain amount of money with each retailer that you have distribution in. Okay, and we'll get into that in a little bit more. But, for those of you that are veterans, you know exactly how this goes. But for those of you who are not, you're going to pay something called slotting, which is basically cash or free product to get onto the shelf. And then you'll generally be expected to do something quarterly to create some action and frankly, give the retailer more of a discount or fund them to keep carrying your product and promoting it. Tracy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I want to launch into one of our bumper stickers, Bruce, on this point about the funding. And that is to our audience, it's about sell through, not about sell in. We see a lot of brands get really excited about getting their product on the shelf, which is great, and it's great to celebrate. But really the challenge and the goal of your brand needs to be that it's selling and getting into the consumer's basket, not just that it's on the shelf. So our bumper sticker is, it's not about sell in, it's about sell through. So I wanted to share that with our audience today.
No, it's a great point.
Okay, next slide. So Bruce and I do meet with a lot of buyers, and supply chain is the #1 question they ask after you share with them how your brand is different, how you're going to support your brand to the consumer and with the trade customer. Then they talk about your supply chain. That has been a big issue here in the US since the pandemic. And so they want to make sure that you can actually ship the product to them. And especially being a UK-based brand, they want to make sure that you have a co-packer here in the US, that you have third-party logistics, you have a DC or a warehouse here. So are you producing to scale? Are you in a test kitchen right now? They want to know all of those questions before they would take you into distribution. As Bruce says, a lot of times the worst kind of brand is one that doesn't ship and doesn't sell. So you want to make sure that your logistics are stress tested and reliable. And also what we mean by that too is that you've got a backup supplier if something happens. We just had recently a brand where their co-packer here in the US decided to take on another brand, and within 30 days said, we're no longer going to produce your product. And the brand had to scramble to find, a new source of supply. So again, can't reiterate this enough, that the supply chain here in the US and getting product to the retailer is really, really important. And shipping to, direct to consumer, if that's what you're doing now, is very different than shipping it to, a retailer or a distributor here in the US.
Yeah, a couple of things to just add on here. So as hopefully COVID gets further into the rearview mirror, the retailers' tolerance for hearing about supply chain issues is beginning to wear thin. They've kind of had enough. So that is a big point that they're going to press on you. We just had another brand that was actually rewarded for not having any supply disruptions into an account called Publix, which is a large grocery chain in the Southeast United States. And they picked up 300 more stores for multiple SKUs because they had no shipping delays in all of 2022. So this kind of stuff really matters. Another thing that retailers are going to really press you on if your product is coming in from outside the US, they will want a lot of proof and confidence that you know how to get your product into the US. Can you get it through customs? If there's testing and releasing, do you have, viable suppliers that you're working with? They don't want to hear your stuff is hung up at the port in Baltimore. I mean, I've been there. I've had stuff hung up in Baltimore. I've had stuff hung up in Miami, and it's very uncomfortable. You're doing all you can. You thought you had everything organized, and some paperwork goes sideways. So you really need to make sure you know how to get your stuff into the US without a lot of hangups and drama. The next thing we want to talk about is you really have to fully understand your cost of goods and your pricing structure. If you're something that's a commodity where there's a lot of variability to your inputs and your price is going to be moving around depending upon, say, something like the cost of green coffee beans, that's going to add another layer of complexity, because if you're an emerging brand, a smaller brand, if you become hard to work with, that's going to be tough. So you really need to understand all the costs going into your P&L. And then you also have to do two other things. You need to have, well, more than that, actually, you need to understand what your price will be at the shelf. And when you talk about that, what is the markup? What is the margin the retailer's going to demand? You have to account for that. And then if you're going through a distributor, what's the markup that distributor is going to take? And then you have to make sure that you still have enough margin that you can fund your business and hopefully operate profitably. But you really need to trace that all the way through to the shelf price, because even if your product is unique, it's still going to exist in some sort of competitive set. And you have to understand, if you're going to be $1 more than your comparative products, how are you going to talk to the retailer that you're actually going to move product? Tracy, anything to add there before you move on?
No, I think you covered it, Bruce. That was
Actually, Bruce and Tracy, I just wanted to add one point about this pricing thing. The thing about it is that, as Bruce and Tracy have mentioned, there's a lot of things to account for. We've had, many clients who say, well, I'm going to get on the shelf and then I'll worry about how I'm going to fund my demand plan. And that's got to come in up front as part of your cost of goods. Do not anticipate that if you're going to succeed in the US market, it's going to be a self-funding demand plan, because typically that doesn't work well. The other thought around pricing structure is that you also want it to reinforce your brand's positioning. Especially in categories like skincare, less expensive isn't always best, because sometimes in the minds of the consumer, it means that it isn't as effective or quality as it could be. So there's a lot of considerations when it comes to pricing structure, and it really behooves you to do your homework here before you come into the market. Thanks, guys.
great. No problem. Great point, Julie. Very important. Oh, can you go back to the previous slide? We had one more point on here.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
That's
There we
okay.
go.
There we go. So the last point on this slide is, do you understand the success metrics of each retailer? And what we mean by that is, do you understand the margin requirement of the category and of the retailer? So what we mean by margin is the the percentage that the retailer makes. This does vary by category. So and also by retailer. Some retailers may work on a 35% margin, some 40 and up to maybe even 50. Also, it varies by category. So in skincare and health and beauty, the margins typically here in the US for a retailer is 50%. In grocery and food and beverage, 35 to 40%. So you need to understand what those metrics are. You also need to understand what their category metric is for movement. Is it typically 3 to 4 units per store per week? You need to make sure you understand that. We also recommend that if you don't understand those things, that you work with some kind of sales organization to help you with that, because they can certainly help you understand that. And then the big thing we always talk about is, do you understand the cost of failure? No one likes to talk about this, but there are significant costs here in the US for failure. They come in two ways. One is every US retailer will require you to guarantee your product. That means that if it does not sell and they discontinue your brand, they are going to ship it back to you at your cost. And also they're going to charge you to ship it back to you. The other thing that happens in failure is what we call markdowns. So if the product does not sell, you're required to fund at least a 50% markdown at your expense. As an example, I just had a call yesterday with Target, a major retailer here. They require the vendor or the brand to fund 100% of the markdown. So if your brand does not sell, it's going to get marked down, and then they're going to ship the remaining inventory back to you at your cost. These are things that people don't like to talk about, but we like to make sure that our brands that we work with understand this cost. Next slide.
Let me add a few things here, Tracy, please. So,
Sure.
you know, as Tracy said, no one likes to talk about failure, but you have to plan for it. The comment earlier about waiting to get your marketing started is dead on. And here's what. Tracy and I interviewed 12 buyers from some of the largest retailers in the US, and all of them said that they generally have a feeling on whether a product is going to be a success or a dud within 90 days. Okay. And if your product is not making hurdle within 6 months, you're going to get what we call the call. They're going to call and say, hey, this isn't going well, which is code for you better do something, or else you start getting into the mode of markdowns and potentially discontinuation, which is really bad. Retailers, the point earlier in the first half of the presentation about data is paramount. Retailers have access to a ton of data. If you're a smaller firm, yes, it's expensive, but you have to find a resource to at least once or twice a year get a snapshot on how things are going from a retail consumption standpoint. For a little bit, retailers might, roll the dice with you, not often, and then not for long. They're going to expect you to know what's going on. So as Tracy just said, if you don't have those resources, a good sales agent or broker, a lot of them have access to that data. But if something's not going well, don't hope the retailer won't notice, because they will. One example for you guys to keep in mind, in health and beauty in the US, we just did a launch of a product over the course of the past 6 months. Slotting, which is just the cost to get onto the shelf in OTC, over-the-counter drugs and health and beauty, is about $250,000 a SKU if you want to go national, right? So keep all these costs in mind. This is an expensive game to play, and a lot of the costs are sunk as soon as you make the move to come in. Next, please. Tracy, did that jar any more thoughts? Otherwise, we can keep it rolling.
No, let's keep it rolling. I do want to make sure we have time at the end for questions.
Yeah, I understand. One of the things that we like to talk to small emerging brands about is putting together what we call a go-to-market strategy. So if you think of a go-to-market strategy, it's kind of the GPS of your brand. Now, I know a lot of entrepreneurs are like, I don't have time to do this kind of stuff. Well, you will have time to do it when something goes wrong, and you'll be like, man, I wish I took some time to write some things down, because it'll provide you with guidelines of what you will and hopefully won't do. Some time invested up front will really tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. And we're going to get into these real quick right now. Tracy?
Right. So the first thing you need to do, and again, I want to just emphasize how important a go-to-market strategy is. This really goes hand in hand with what Kate and Julie are talking about doing your homework with the consumer and understanding, the consumer dynamics of your brand, and here, especially in the US. But this is, I equate this go-to-market strategy like, leaving your house and just driving and not having a GPS or knowing where you're going or the route you're going to take. It is a recipe for disaster, I think, if you don't have, this go-to-market strategy. So the first thing you need to think about is what we call the class of trade. And what we mean by that here in the US is there's a drug channel, a CVS, a Walgreens, there's mass, which is Walmart and Target. There's dollar stores like Family Dollar and Dollar General. There's convenience stores. So you really need to think through where you want to go. There's airport shops. There's just so many retail outlets types in the US. You really have to think about it. Telling yourself, I just want my brand everywhere is also a recipe for disaster. Bruce and I have seen this before where the brand just wants to be everywhere, even when it doesn't fit. For example, if you've got a really high-end skincare that's, $25 cost, you probably don't want to go to the dollar channel where skincare would be $2 or $3. So you really do need to think about where you're going to go. And that's part of that roadmap of the go-to-market strategy. You also need to think about utilizing distributors. There's two main distributors here in the US. UNFI is one, KeHE is one. They service a lot of the natural channel, but then we have other types of distributors that distribute to convenience stores and other US retail outlets. So you really need to think about, where do you want to go? Where is my brand the best fit? Bruce?
Right. So within the classes of trade, there's different competitors. So if you wanted to get into, say, food stores, there's some that focus on being low price all the time. There's some that focus on service, and they're not afraid of higher prices. If your product has some sort of regional bias or ethnic bias, as was said in the first half of the presentation, those are markets and parts of the country you might want to go to. All of us have seen brands get excited because they meet someone at a trade show or get an intro, and they're like, hey, they'll give me a meeting at such and such in Denver, Colorado. Well, that might not make any sense to you for your brand. Okay. So you really want to think through kind of the order and sequence of where you go. Some of the accounts that really focus on keeping prices low, if you go there early, that can make it hard for you to get into some of the other accounts later, because they'll say, oh my gosh, look at this price at Walmart. I can't compete with that. And they'll push you off until you maybe get to a size where they just have to have you. But, a lot of brands never get to the size where someone has to have them. So really think through the order and sequence of where you go. And the last point here is, if you're coming to the US, I hope we've made the point that it's expensive to play here. If you go to a retailer and they say, hey, let's do a 50 or 100 store test, that is a good day, because you get to go in, you get to really manage your cash outlay in terms of inventory and shipping. You're still going to have to support it. You're still going to have to get it turning at the shelf. But we helped a brand try to salvage. They went into Walmart with 4 SKUs in full distribution, 4,000 plus stores, and just filling that initial order soaked up almost all their cash. And they were in trouble cash flow wise for about 6 months. And then a couple of the SKUs didn't work. So testing and learning is good. Tracy?
Absolutely. Great point, Bruce. So the next thing you need to take into consideration is what we call a category review schedule. So most, I would say, major retailers especially, have a time during the year that they review a category. So let's say you're selling in, a cookie. So that category review may not be until next May. So regardless of what you may have the greatest cookie in the world. It doesn't matter. They're not going to look at your brand until that category review comes about. And then they have specific dates that they will make decisions, then get you set up as a new vendor, get the new items set up, and then do what we call a reset or set the shelf. This whole process can take 6 to 9 months and to even up to a year before the product actually hits the shelf. So you just need to make sure that when you're coming again to the US, that you understand that there's a time frame for that retailer to look at your brand, and then it can be 6, 9, 12 months before the product actually gets on the shelf. And there is a lot of work to be done in that process of getting the product set up, getting you set up as a vendor, your vendor number. It's just a lot of data and a lot of hard work to get set up at a major retailer. Bruce?
Great point. And the last point here, folks, is constructing a budget for your demand plan. We have had instances when we interviewed those buyers, a couple of them said that when they've dealt with small emerging brands, they've made them actually show a bank statement to prove that they had the money to fund a demand plan. And kind of what they said to us was, I need to know that these brands are committed to their own business before they ask me to commit to their business. So how are you going to create demand against the consumer, pressure against the consumer, and how are you going to support with spending and buying programs, whether it's ads or displays, sampling, et cetera, temporary price reductions within each of the accounts you go to. So again, if you're really small, just getting into one, maybe two accounts and then staying also online, that's a good way to kind of really learn what it's going to take to be successful here. And you can kind of manage the downside in terms of cash out. The last point here is I want to drive home how critical it is for all of you guys to really maintain control of your pricing. You do not want to end up cutting individual deals with everyone you deal with, whether it's a distributor and then you have a retailer here and you're selling online. That is a recipe for disaster, because before you know it, there will be alternative sources of supply for your product. And if you start to get traction and you're successful, retailers will check what's called the wire, and they'll be buying product, but not from you. So be really rigid in the pricing that you go forward with. Don't have too many deals. And when you go into a retailer, if you're a product that has a lot of SKUs, you don't want 8 in there at first. Pick like your top 2 or 3 and be successful, and then expand out from there. Because remember, they're going to want slotting dollars. That slotting is for each individual item, not just your brand. Okay, so keep that in mind. Tracy, anything to add there? Otherwise, I think we'll close the questions.
Yep, I think we're good.
So in order to give ourselves time for questions, just want you to know there's a slide in here that talks about how we typically get started, the 4 of us, when we're helping our clients who are interested in coming into the US market. So if you have any questions on this, as you've had a chance to review it, we're happy to discuss it with you. And now, Jose, we'll hop over for question and answer.
Okay, thank you very much for this insightful summary of how to tackle the US. That was great. Thank you. Yes, so just now we start the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, just pop on the Q&A box. I'll start with one of mine. In terms of what would you say for a UK brand that enters in the US market in terms of the best route to market? But I guess going to retailers directly could be quite hard. I don't know if there's any best route to market for a new brand getting to the US. Anybody?
Tracy, Bruce, do you guys want to weigh in on that first?
Yeah, so what we typically recommend, and then I'll let Bruce chime in here, is that you pick start regionally. So start where, you know, if you do which you should do, the consumer research, find out where the best concentration of your consumers are, and then, you know, start there. But we preach a lot what we call small ball. So pick a region, a Northeast, a Southwest, the West Coast, and really penetrate that area and start there, gain some momentum, gain some success, and then you can expand from there. We certainly do not recommend that you start nationally. We don't recommend that you start with a major retailer like a Target or a Walmart. So start with small regional players in the retail space and then expand from there. Bruce?
The only thing I would add to that is the discipline of the go-to-market strategy, which we just spoke of. If you put pen to paper and really work through that document, that will start to tell you, geez, I can't do this, or I'm going to need a distributor, or maybe I just really need to license my brand to someone who specializes in skincare. But doing that go-to-market strategy and having that consumer work done that was mentioned right up front here today, that'll start to really kind of clear your vision on what you should do next.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. We have a few questions. So we have Mary Louise. What products are trending or in high demand? For example, pet products, garden furniture, sustainable beauty products, etc.
I think from a consumer standpoint, we can certainly say it really does definitely depend. I mean, those are pretty large areas. You know, pet products went up significantly during the COVID time because there was so much incremental pet ownership. But that means that business is pretty now well developed. I think within that segment, if you get into pet tech, that's where you're seeing the most growth, or any kind of technological solutions for pet is really where we're seeing some growth. Next one was garden furniture. Oh boy, that one was really big in during COVID because everyone was at home. And now what we're seeing with consumers in general is that they are taking their money, which is now with inflation not going as far, and they're going out. They want to go traveling again. They want to go out again. So anything for home, you know, one of our large companies here is Wayfair. And Wayfair's really has been struggling because they did so much during COVID. And they've had to see a lot of layoffs. So I think when you think garden furniture, that's probably a tougher market from a trend standpoint. Last one mentioned was sustainable beauty products. And I think we could all agree that's one that's definitely seeing growth and potential. So truly sustainable, you know, probably natural, also seeing growth, but, you know, kind of skincare, beauty care, there's within that, we're seeing some differences because obviously people are out and about now. So color cosmetics is coming back. So beauty care, skincare is shifting a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think once again, I hate to use this again, but it does so depend on exactly what category. So that's just addressing those ones that were asked about.
I was going to say the thing about beauty care is that here in the US, it has become such a crowded the category, subcategory, etc., that you really have to have a well thought out plan and a distinct point of difference, because there's a lot of noise over here in the beauty care, skincare, personal care business.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Can you provide, a question, any information on sales tax and its implications?
Say that again, Jose. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you can provide any information on sales tax and its implications.
Yeah, I'll take that one. None of us should answer that because your clients over there should talk to their own accounting firm, because depending upon what type of product it is, how it has to be transported, how it will come through customs, etc., all of that, what state it enters the US, there's all kinds of tax ramifications, and that's just on the US side. You know, we try to make our taxes here as complicated as possible to employ as many accountants as possible. So they need real professional guidance there.
Thank you, Bruce. Next question is, can I have a bit more detail on how to conduct market research from the UK?
Definitely. There are many different resources. I think Julie mentioned earlier as well, you know, we have a database of over 1 million consumers that we use frequently, where we can go out and access very quick consumer research, and it's representative of the US Census. So there are several tools, and it's one of the things that Julie and I spend a lot of time always evaluating and assessing what options there are. But there are several different tools available for getting consumer insights. And then of course there's data that you can get that's kind of, through primary research just on the web, but we can do very specific targeted consumer research. And that's one of the things that we offer.
All right. Next question is, how much consumer support is required for a listed retail product? 24/7 helpline number, etc. Is that legally required, for example, car care products which meet Prop 65 CA registered? That's a quite specific question. I don't know if anybody can reply to that.
If it's a healthcare related question, I'll take a shot at it. So there are regulatory consulting firms. One is called Lumanity, Lumanity. I've worked with them a lot. Depending upon what the actual segment of healthcare they're talking about, there are different rules. You have to identify where the product is made and who distributes it. And at least in the US, to not have an 800 phone number and a website contact us would be very unusual. Now, a lot of the website contact us are not 24/7. You'll send an email in, you'll get a response, but all of them have a warning that if there's a healthcare problem, call 911 or go to a hospital. If you're feeling awful for some reason, don't sit around till the operator gets on the phone at 8 in the morning.
I think to build on that, Bruce, I think for products outside of healthcare and health and wellness, there's a lot of companies employing things like chat box and other ways through all their digital marketing approaches that they can, if you can come up with a series of frequently asked questions, you can serve that. But once again, this is outside of if there are any regulatory issues or safety issues involved in the questions. Oh, Jose, I think I couldn't hear that.
Number was the question.
Do you have other questions, Jose?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Is the practice of charging for slotting and in-store marketing specific to the bigger retail chains, or do smaller regional chains?
I can take that. Yes. Most, I would say 95% of US retailers will charge some kind of slotting, either in free goods or cash. And then you have also a subsegment of retailers, which we call everyday low cost or everyday low price retailers. And they will require you to give them some kind of ongoing discount so that they can be have the lowest price in the market. But yes, in some form or fashion, every retailer in the US will charge some kind of fee to get your product on the shelf. Would you agree with that, Bruce?
Definitely. I mean, slotting is kind of a little bit of money in their pockets for the risk they're taking by bringing you in as a new vendor. Again, in the US, when each of these buyers is in charge of what's called their set, they really don't care if Bruce's brand is great or Tracy's, as long as their set performs well. That is the most important thing. They want to know, if they bring in a new item, is it going to do better than whatever they're knocking out? So it's all about making sure that you're adding to the success of that retailer's set.
All right, I think we have time for one last question, and the answer questions will reply to you. So the last question is, the barriers to enter in US retail seem high and the cost direct and associate large. How is the US physical retail comparing to the US online? I guess my question is, if you are gathering the data on Amazon and DTC to justify the store listing, what is the scale of the marginal value prop for the jump to physical retail?
I'll take a shot at it.
All right.
If you're asking about the size, I do a lot of work in health and beauty. A health and beauty brand in the US, if it's reasonably well developed, okay, it should be doing between 12 and 15% of their total sales on Amazon. Okay. So you could argue, so the potential is a multiple of that to fill in the other 85%. That is a lazy way to size it because of all the expenses we've laid out. You know, if you go 1P or 3P on Amazon, you can build a nice little business and then jump into maybe one retailer and test how it goes in brick and mortar. And then if that gets success, you know, you can go another way. The example they put up of Ollie was great. Ollie and a group called Harry's, the shaving company, they both started online and got to the point where they created a market for retailers to bid on carrying them. So I'm not sure I answered it, but a health and beauty brand that's established should be doing about 12 to 16% of their total sales on Amazon.
Jose,
thank
I
you.
will also say about the e-commerce versus brick and mortar. I mean, e-commerce isn't free either. You know, it's become
No
a
way.
very crowded marketplace now. And so you definitely still need to have a demand generation plan if in fact you do want to use it as a segue into brick and mortar. It's just, you know, it's not as expensive an endeavor as it is to go national at a place like Walmart.
All right, thank you. I think it's all the time we have now. So I just want to thank all the speakers and the participants to join this webinar. I hope it's been very useful for everybody, and thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.